It's only year one for Scott Frost back in Orlando, and he's already got a mega matchup on the schedule against North Carolina.
You are Locked On UCF, your daily podcast on the UCF Knights, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome on in to Locked On UCF, your daily UCF podcast. I'm your host, Mike G, and thank you so much for making us your first listen of every single day. Turn us up, turn us on. We'll turn it out. I'm here with my good friend, James Duncan, a UCF sports commentator extraordinaire, to talk a little UCF football. James, on today's show, we're going to talk about which game fans are most excited for. I teased that mega matchup potentially early in the season. We did a recent interview with a commit, and he talked about how Scott Frost is connecting with recruits, and then emerging leadership here in camp. It seems leaders are starting to emerge, so we'll talk about the importance of that at the end of the show. But let's start at the top here with the game that fans are most excited to see. I have said repeatedly, find out what kind of football team this is when UCF and North Carolina match up, James. But the Daytona Beach News Journal ran a poll asking fans which game they were most excited for, and fans overwhelmingly voted for that matchup with Super Bowl winning Bill Belichick early in the season. This game represents a significant opportunity, I think, for Scott Frost to burst onto the national stage if he can take down the legend that is Bill Belichick. Man, what an opportunity early in the season for Scott Frost and the UCF Knights.
Yeah, that's a big opportunity. It kind of reminds me of last year with TCU. I feel like in the first three games, you get like your gimme, you get your like semi, and then you get your hard opponent. And like that for my first 2 years in school was UCF Louisville. And we were not able to get the better of them either of those 2 years, despite being so close. I mean, brutal losses both years. This year, that's the case for UNC, is we have to, that is the game where we are going to figure out what team this is. Bill Belichick is obviously renowned coach. He's a very like defensive minded coach, which is why I think that this game is going to be so interesting, because you have Scott Frost, who is a very offensive heavy coach, and then you have Bill Belichick, who is known for his defensive stability and all the things that he does. He runs a 3-4 or a 4-3 front. He's not married to a scheme. He's able to disguise things. Later in his career, he actually played a lot of hybrid defenders that could play out of role or out of position. So I'm really interested to see what he has prepared against the Knights, because I think it's going to be a phenomenal matchup watching this like water versus fire sort of deal, where you're seeing someone who's so offensive minded versus someone that's so defensive minded. I think it's going to be a phenomenal game.
Yeah, you raise a good point about an offensive mind versus a defensive mind, right? Like which one wins out here? Will it be the Scott Frost offense? They want to play fast. They've talked about playing fast, and if he has his quarterback, which is a big question in this one, then they should play fast. But the run game is going to factor in big in this one, I think, for UCF. Now, Myles Montgomery appears to be the leader, I think, based on what Scott Frost is saying in the media. We got reports that Jaden Nixon has been doing great in camp, but it looks like that could be a two-headed monster. Talk to me about the importance of the run game in a matchup like this, where down the stretch, if UCF should find themselves up in the fourth quarter, you need to be able to control the clock by running the ball and keeping the ball out of harm's way.
Yeah, well, Bill Belichick is very known for running like a 3-4, 4-3, but he's got a two-gap scheme. So he's going to try and fill up that front four or those front five, and he's going to try and find those gaps to where he can contain running backs. The best thing that you have with Jaden Nixon and you have with Myles is these guys know when to bounce it outside. And that is something that Myles actually has been quoted saying that he learned from RJ Harvey, because you used to see RJ Harvey try and find the middle scheme or find the gap, and it's not there, so he bounces it outside. It might not work in the NFL very well, but it does work in college. And when you try and fill two gaps on the inside, you're going to have an outside area. You just got to get past those linebackers. I think running the ball is going to be extremely important, because if you don't have a run game, you can't air it out either.
Yeah, look, you're going to have to be multifaceted, I think, versus a Bill Belichick coached team. One-dimensional teams don't do well. You've got to have two dimensions to it. And I think that's what we saw last year with UCF's offense. Was they were pretty one-dimensional in terms of what was effective, and that was the run game. RJ Harvey was an absolute monster, and he was still underutilized amazingly. You've got to find that second dimension to help take some tension off that run game, which should be a strength for UCF offensively. Now, another part of this, we talk about the run game, but Scott Frost has been effusive in his praise for his wide receiver room so far this fall camp. He's talked about really liking that group. Now, it's not a super experienced group, but he likes the talent in there. I think it's big that he's giving so much praise to an unproven group. It shows he's got a lot of faith in those guys.
A lot of speed over there. And I think the last time you watched UCF be really successful is when there was speed in the wide receiver room and in the backfield. You already know you have speed in Myles. You already know you have speed in Jaden. You got to see the unproven speed. And one of the guys' names, Dwayne Thomas, he is known as Speedy Thomas. I watched film on this kid. He is fast. He is fast. You also have DJ Black, and you've got a lot of people in that room, unproven talent like Jordan Bridgewater, who I would watch out for that kid this year. I think he could have a halfway decent year if he gets some playing time. There's a lot of players in that room, Marcus Burke, that have speed and that have one-on-one catchability. You just have to find the right scheme, and you have to be able to put these guys in the proper positions, because you can have receivers get open. You can have receivers get separation. But if that ball is late, or if that ball is not placed right, it just brings everything back to the quarterback.
Yeah, it does. Look, of the production that UCF has to replace with no RJ Harvey. But when we talk about this matchup with North Carolina, they've got huge hole to fill with Omari and Hampton no longer being there as well, too. So, respectively, they were two of the best backs in the country. RJ Harvey famously averaged 6.8 yards per carry last season. Omari and Hampton just 6.4 yards per carry. These guys were monsters carrying the ball by the averages. Look, they've got capable backups on both sides. I'm feeling like with the addition of Jaden Nixon, the run game is advantage UCF.
Oh, for sure. I agree there, because I think, like you said, there's a lot of turnover. Like, you have to, they're both replacing their head coach, and they're both replacing their main offensive production in the backfield. And for UCF, just offensive production in general, I believe for UNC as well. I mean, Omari and Hampton toted the rock quite a bit for them last year. There's a lot of turnover. There's a lot of questions, and there's a lot of things that are in the air. I would love to see UCF pull that out. I think that they do have the advantage because you had Myles right in the background, and you brought in Jaden Nixon, who was a 1,400 yard rusher or 1,200 yard rusher from Western Michigan. So I think that you have more talent back there than UNC. I think you're right.
Yeah, look, it's going to be fun watching this matchup. Again, fans overwhelmingly, James, voted this the most anticipated matchup of the season. Although it is an out-of-conference P4 game, and it's not a conference game, I think this is the game that we learn. It's the litmus test for what the rest of the season will be like. Yeah, you find out what kind of mettle your team has in this one. But look, we're going to turn our sights to recruiting in our next segment. We had a talk with a recent UCF commit about his experience with Scott Frost in recruiting. Let's dig into that next on Locked on UCF. This episode of Locked On UCF is brought to you by our friends at FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Summer sports are in full swing, and whether you're about baseball under the lights or golf on the green or high-stakes soccer action, FanDuel is the best way to make every game more exciting. You're already following the action. Why not make it more thrilling with FanDuel? You can get in on the game while your friends are getting sunburned at the beach. I already got a built-in tan, so I'd rather be on FanDuel. New to FanDuel, new customers can bet just $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if your first bet wins. Open the FanDuel app today and visit FanDuel.com to get started. Guys, get in the game with FanDuel. We spoke with Preston Hall yesterday, and he talked about his experience with Scott Frost. And when he met him for the first time, Scott Frost wowed Preston Hall with his knowledge of his tape, how much he said, Mike, this guy studied me. He knew my game, and he knew my background. He knew about my dad. He knew everything about me. Scott Frost doing work on the recruiting trail. You and I have had conversations off camera about the importance of UCF taking an advantage of those diamonds in the rough in recruiting. So they're up to 15 recruits now. They've got one 4-star and Al-Hassan Idrisu. I hope I said his name correctly. And then a bunch of 3-star guys that could play like 4-star guys. They seem to be evaluating it at a high level, but Scott Frost is connecting with each and every single recruit. I think this pays big dividends for UCF here in year one.
Yeah, for sure. I totally agree. And I think oftentimes people see the jump from 3 to 4-star and automatically assume that 4-star player is going to be leagues better than the 3-star guy. And there are a lot of 3-star guys out there, but there's also a lot of 4-star guys out there. I think that the 5-star is like, okay, this is proven, like this is going to be successful, but a lot of times they aren't. So I think that nothing is proven. I think people forget about Scott Frost's resume as a player because he played quarterback at Nebraska. He played defense in the NFL. Correct me if I'm wrong. I believe he played defense in the NFL. So he knows both sides of the ball. There's no lack of understanding for either side of the line of scrimmage. I think that's so important because you know how to evaluate film on both sides of the ball. He can look at a linebacker and say, dude, I don't know how nobody saw you. I don't know how nobody noticed this on your film because this is fantastic. This is what we want in our program. He can look at the offensive side of the ball and say, I don't know how nobody told you this, that this is great. This is what we need in our program. It's so important because he's not that far removed from playing in the NFL. Yeah. He's not that far removed from seeing the professional game as an analyst last year. So it's so important for you to be able to analyze talent, not only as an analyst or a coach, but as being a former player who's played at the collegiate and professional level. It's just so important. And players are able to connect with players significantly more than players are able to connect with coaches that haven't really played the game at an elite level. And you see that with Scott.
I believe he played safety in the NFL. You're correct.
Yeah.
I think he played safety in the NFL. Quarterback in college was safety in the NFL. Having a guy who, again, has some pedigree on both sides of the ball, definitely helpful if you're Scott Frost, certainly. And then you talk about, in terms of head coaches, he's pretty young, man, only 50 years old, dude. He played in the NFL in the early 2000s. He is a guy who should be able to guide recruits through that journey of, if you want to make it to the league, here are the things that you need to do. And I think it said something for, a coach who played one position in college, but another in the NFL, understanding what it takes to switch positions and take advantage of your talent. That's something that before we move on, I think that's something that is going to be super important in terms of evaluation. A lot of these recruits are going to have to trust this coaching staff to look at their talent and say, you know what, you may be better suited playing this, put on 20 pounds and move the offensive line. And that's such a trust game for young players who played a certain position their whole life. But, you come in wanting to be a quarterback and they say, hey, man, we want to move you to wide receiver. And a lot of guys don't want to do that. But if you want to play pro, you got to trust somebody's evaluation of you at some point. Scott Frost, building that trust early, I think, is what we heard from Preston Hall. But look, that trust should beget leaders. And UCF is establishing culture in year one and building leaders. We'll talk about the importance of building that leadership next on Locked On UCF. James, there's an idea that player-led teams are the best-led teams. You need leaders in your locker room. You need guys to step up and be what Scott Frost himself coined as culture keepers. You need culture keepers. They seem to be building that. Myles Montgomery is proven to be a culture keeper early, somebody who is carrying the flag for what he thinks Scott Frost wants in terms of culture. Guys seem to be buying in on that. They've got to believe they can win this year. And I've been really big on this. I want to close the show talking about the idea that even though this is a rebuild, I like that Scott Frost is not saying in the media, oh, well, this team is more talented than us. He's trying to find how he can squeeze every drop of everything out of the roster he has now and figure out how to win every single game now. Now, obviously, there's a gap between UCF and the top of the league in terms of average composite star or talent or whatever. But I like that he's focused on winning now, and he seems to be instilling a belief in his team that they can win now.
Yeah, I think guys that want to win and want to become leaders will become leaders. And I think that that's exactly the case with Myles. I think if you've talked to Myles or been around Myles, he's, especially like last year, he's just wasn't a big talker. He's not a guy that is he's like kind of more shy, on the shyer side. But this year it's like opposite. He is kind of opened up into this verbal leader role, especially off the field. It's become very verbal. It's become, I am an open leader. And the players have even mentioned that once he gets on the field, it's more of a sergeant sort of deal where it's like, I'm going to show you what I need to do. But you have all of these leaders now. You have two leaders in the backfield with Myles. I made a specific note in my notes that watch out for young leaders and young players to emerge as leaders, because it starts early. It starts a lot earlier than you would think, for guys coming out and saying, I'm gonna be a vocal guy. I'm gonna lead this room, or I'm gonna lead the other freshmen or lead the other redshirt freshmen around me. It's very important to have those leaders emerge, and that happens in the weight room. That happens in summer conditioning when guys are hanging their heads. That happens in the suicides on the field when they're running back and forth. But you have transfer leaders too. I specifically wrote Lewis Carter and Kelly Lawson on the defense, two linebackers and defensive players that I think are going to make a big difference in vocal leadership back there. Philip Dunham and a bunch of these other guys, DJ Bell, Jaden Bellamy. You have a lot of transfers that are coming in, and these guys are talking. These guys are leading the rooms that they are in. And that is important, because and vocalization and communication is just as important as the athleticism of the player.
Could not agree more. Look, at some point, you need your quarterback to stand up and be a vocal leader as well, too. They're still searching for a starting quarterback, but I'm hoping to hear that the quarterback is going to be one of those guys that's stepping up here. Now, nobody has separated themselves according to Scott Frost. However, reports are Cam Fencher seems to be gaining ground. We did a segment talking about Jacurri Brown not being out of it yet, but it feels like every other day one of these guys is impressing the coach and making it a really hard decision headed into week one. Now, they could still be sorting that out week one against Jacksonville State, but I am excited to see who emerges as the leader there. Because, if you're Scott Frost, you don't want to really go back and forth with your quarterbacks. You hope one of these guys takes the job by the reins and just holds on to it, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a positive and a negative. The positive is that you have three guys that they are considering of relative equal talent. Whether or not you want to say that's three guys that aren't very good, or whether that's three guys that are semi-good, or whether that's three guys that are really good. It means that they're all still competing and competitive for the job. I think if there was a guy, they would have already said it. Now I put my vote in the hat for Jacurri, and I think one of the reasons that I did that is also because he has been a proven vocal leader, especially off the field. He has led these guys and been very vocal about it off the field, especially when they did the program.
Yeah, it's going to be fun to watch. Definitely. Look, lots to talk about here as we move through fall camp and eventually into week one game prep. James Duncan, I want to thank you for joining me as always on this edition of Locked on UCF. Guys, thank you so much for making us your first listen of every single day. For your next listen, go check out our friends at the Portal Show. Our guy Brian Smith has the latest in portal signings, rumors, all the going-ons in college football. You can find the Portal Show on YouTube or wherever you listen to your podcast. You can find us here tomorrow on Locked on UCF.